Severus Snape, from childhood friend to double agent. Chapter 1. The Outcast's Friendship. In the grimy, industrial town of Cokeworth, where factory chimneys belched acrid smoke into the perpetually grey sky, a young boy with lank black hair and ill-fitting clothes skulked through the narrow streets. This was Severus Snape, a half-blood wizard whose very existence seemed to teeter on the edge of two worlds, belonging fully to neither.
Bloody muggles,
He muttered under his breath, his dark eyes darting furtively as he made his way towards the local playground. The frayed hem of his mother's old robes dragged in the dirt, collecting grime with each step. As he approached the rusty swings, a flash of vibrant red caught his eye.
It can't be.
His breath hitched as he watched a girl with fiery hair perform feats that defied the laws of nature. She soared from the swing at its apex, floating gently to the ground as if gravity itself bent to her will. Severus' heart raced, his palms grew clammy. Here, in this drab muggle town, was a witch, and one with extraordinary innate talent.
Toonie, did you see that? I flew.
Lily, stop it. You'll hurt yourself.
The older girl's shrill voice cut through the air, her face pinched with worry and a hint of something darker. Envy, perhaps? Severus watched as Lily plucked a flower from the ground, cupping it in her hands. To his amazement, the petals began to open and close, as if the flower were breathing.
They are right, Lily. How do you do it?
I don't know. It just happens. Don't you wish you could do it too?
Severus could contain himself no longer. He stepped out from behind the bushes, his heart thundering in his chest.
I know why you can do it.
Both girls whirled to face him, startled by his sudden appearance. Lily's emerald eyes widened with curiosity, while Petunia's narrowed in suspicion.
You do? How?
You're a witch.
That's not a very nice thing to say.
Petunia's face flushed with indignation, but Lily merely tilted her head, intrigued.
A witch? Like with a pointy hat and a broomstick?
A rare smile tugged at the corners of Severus' mouth.
Well, yes, but it's so much more than that. There's a whole world out there, hidden from muggles. Non-magical people, I mean. We have our own school, Hogwarts, where young witches and wizards learn to control their magic.
Are you a wizard then?
Severus nodded, a hint of pride creeping into his voice.
I am. My mom's a witch, but my dad's a muggle. You're muggle-born. It means your parents aren't magical, but you are.
This is ridiculous. Lily, we're leaving. Mom said not to talk to strangers.
Petunia tugged at her sister's arm, but Lily stood her ground, fascinated by Severus' words.
Wait, Toonie, I want to hear more. What's your name?
Severus Snape.
I'm Lily Evans, and this is my sister Petunia. Can you show us some magic, Severus?
Severus hesitated, glancing around nervously.
We're not supposed to do magic outside of school, but I could tell you more about our world if you'd like.
Oh yes, please.
Lily, this is mad. He's probably making it all up.
But Lily was already moving closer to Severus, her eyes alight with wonder. Petunia, left behind, crossed her arms and scowled.
Can we meet again? Tomorrow, maybe? There's a lovely spot in the woods where we could talk without being disturbed.
Severus nodded eagerly, his sallow cheeks flushing slightly.
I'd like that. I could bring some books about magic, show you what we'll learn at Hogwarts.
Brilliant. I can't wait.
As the girls departed, Petunia, casting suspicious glances over her shoulder, Severus felt a warmth blooming in his chest. For the first time in his young life, he had found someone who looked at him not with disgust or pity, but with genuine interest and excitement. The following day, Severus arrived at the agreed-upon spot in the woods, clutching a worn copy of Hogwarts, a history, to his chest. The dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves cast shifting patterns on the forest floor, creating an almost magical atmosphere.
Severus, you came.
Lily's voice rang out, clear and bright as a bell. She bounded into the clearing, her red hair streaming behind her like a banner.
Of course I did. I brought this for you to look at.
He held out the book, suddenly self-conscious of its tattered state.
It's wonderful. Look at the moving pictures.
She gasped in delight as the figures on the cover waved and moved about.
That's normal for wizard photographs and paintings. Wait until you see the ghosts at Hogwarts.
Ghosts. Real ghosts?
Her eyes widened, a mix of excitement and apprehension flickering across her face.
Don't worry, they're mostly friendly, except for Peeves. But he's a poltergeist, not a proper ghost.
They spent hours poring over the book, Severus explaining the intricacies of the magical world with a patience and enthusiasm he rarely displayed. Lily absorbed every word, peppering him with questions.
What about wands? Do we really get to use them?
Oh yes, every witch and wizard has their own wand. It chooses you, you know. We'll get ours from Ollivanders in Diagon Alley when we're 11.
That's amazing. Can you show me some magic now, please?
Severus hesitated, glancing around as if expecting the Ministry of Magic to appear at any moment.
Well, I suppose a small charm wouldn't hurt, but you can't tell anyone, Lily. Promise?
Cross my heart.
Severus picked up a fallen leaf, concentrating hard. With a whispered incantation, the leaf began to hover a few inches above his palm.
Oh, Sev, that's brilliant. Will I be able to do that too?
Severus nodded, a rare, genuine smile lighting up his face at her use of the nickname.
Of course, you're already doing magic without even trying. Once you learn to control it, you'll be amazing.
As the weeks passed, their clandestine meetings in the woods became a daily occurrence. For Severus, they were a refuge from the harsh reality of his home life. Here, away from his father's drunken rages and his mother's quiet desperation, he could be himself. One particularly sweltering afternoon, they sat by a sluggish stream, dipping their feet in the cool water.
What's wrong, Sev? You've barely said a word all day.
Severus hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his frayed sleeve.
It's nothing. Just stuff at home.
You can count me, you know. We're friends.
The word friends seemed to hang in the air between them, fragile and precious. Severus took a deep breath.
My dad, he doesn't like magic. He and Mum were fighting again last night. I heard things breaking.
Lily's face crumpled in sympathy. Without a word, she reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently.
I'm sorry, Sev. Oh, it must be awful.
It's fine. I'll be away at Hogwarts soon enough. We both will.
He managed a small smile, drawing strength from her presence. Lily's eyes lit up with an idea.
Hey, why don't you come over to my house tomorrow? Mum's making her famous treacle tart. It always cheers me up.
Severus hesitated, torn between his desire to spend more time with Lily and his fear of intruding on her normal life.
I don't know. Your sister doesn't like me much.
Oh, Wantuni. She's just jealous because she can't do magic. Please come, Sev. It'll be fun.
Unable to resist her pleading look, Severus nodded.
All right, but only if you're sure your parents won't mind.
They won't. They've been dying to meet you. I've told them all about how you're teaching me about the magical world.
The next day, Severus stood nervously on the Evans' doorstep, tugging at the collar of his best shirt, which was still rather shabby. The door swung open to reveal Lily's beaming face.
Sev, you came. Mom, Dad, this is Severus.
Mr. and Mrs. Evans greeted him warmly, ushering him into a home that was everything his, wasn't, bright, clean, and filled with the aroma of bacon.
It's lovely to meet you, Severus. Lily's told us so much about you. Yes, all this talk of magic schools and flying broomsticks. I must say, it's quite fascinating.
Severus relaxed slightly, basking in their genuine interest and kindness. Even Petunia, sulking in the corner, couldn't dampen his spirits.
Thank you for having me, Mr. and Mrs. Evans. I brought something to show you.
From his pocket, he produced a small vial filled with a shimmering, color-changing liquid.
It's a simple mood, reflecting potion. I brewed it myself.
Miss Beautiful.
My word, that's extraordinary. And you made this yourself?
Severus nodded, a hint of pride creeping into his voice.
Potions is my best subject. My mum taught me.
Well, I say you have a bright future ahead of you, young man.
As they gathered around the table for treacle tart, Severus felt a warmth he had never experienced before. Here, in this cozy Muggle home, he had found acceptance and kindness. He glanced at Lily, who gave him a radiant smile, and for a moment he could almost believe that this happiness could last forever. However, as summer waned and the start of term approached, a shadow began to creep over their idyllic friendship. It arrived in the form of 2 letters, borne by tawny owls on a misty morning.
Sev, look, it's here. My Hogwarts letter.
Lily's voice rang out across the playground, her face alight with joy as she waved the parchment envelope. Severus, clutching his own letter, felt a conflicting surge of emotions, excitement for the future that awaited them, tinged with a fear he couldn't quite name.
That's brilliant, Lily. I knew you'd get in.
We're really going, Sev. We'll learn proper magic and see all those wonderful things you've told me about.
Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Severus found himself grinning despite his apprehension.
We'll be the best in our year, you'll see. I can already do loads of spells.
A flicker of doubt crossed Lily's face.
But I don't know any yet. What if I'm behind everyone else?
Don't worry. You're so talented, Lily. You'll catch up in no time.
He hesitated, then added in a softer voice,
Besides, I'll help you. We'll stick together, won't we?
Always, Sev. You're my best friend.
The words warmed him, chasing away his fears. Yet as they pored over their letters, discussing the required books and equipment, a shrill voice cut through their excitement.
So you're really going to that freak school then?
Petunia stood at the edge of the playground, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was a mask of disdain, but her eyes betrayed a deeper hurt.
It's not a freak school, Toonie. It's wonderful. I wish you could come too.
As if I'd want to. Go off and learn to pull rabbits out of hats. See if I care.
It's not like that. You're just jealous because you're ordinary and Lily's special.
The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Petunia's face flushed red, her eyes filling with angry tears.
Dashel, ha, I know what you are. You're that Snape boy from Spinner's Inn. Your dad drinks and your mum's a weirdo. You're nothing but a freak.
She turned on her heel and ran, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Lily looked torn, her eyes darting between her retreating sister and Severus.
Sev, you shouldn't have said that. She's my sister.
But she called us freaks. How can you defend her?
She's just upset. This is all so new and strange for her. For all of us, really.
Severus bit back a retort, not wanting to argue with Lily. But as they resumed their excited chatter about Hogwarts, a small seed of doubt had been planted. The magical world that had once been their secret sanctuary was now threatening to drive a wedge between Lily and her family. And where would that leave him? As the day of departure for Hogwarts drew near, the tension in both households grew palpable. At Spinner's End, Severus packed his meager belongings in a battered trunk, his mother hovering anxiously nearby.
Have you got everything, Severus? Your wand, your books?
Yes, Mom?
Eileen Snape's gaunt face softened for a moment, a flicker of pride shining through her usual defeated expression.
You'll do well at Hogwarts, my boy. You've got talent, just like your prince ancestors.
A door slammed downstairs, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Eileen flinched, her moment of warmth evaporating.
Your father's home. Best stay up here and finish packing.
Severus nodded, a familiar knot of anger and fear tightening in his chest. As his mother hurried from the room, he could hear his father's slurred voice rising in volume.
Where's the boy? Off to that freak school, is he?
Severus winced at his father's harsh words, his fingers curling around his wand for comfort. The floorboards creaked as Tobias stomped up the stairs, his voice growing louder with each step.
Think you're better than us now, do you? With your magic tricks and fancy school?
The door burst open, revealing Tobias Snape's imposing figure. His bloodshot eyes narrowed as they landed on Severus' trunk.
I'm leaving tomorrow. You won't have to see me again until summer.
Tobias' face contorted with a mix of anger and something that might have been pain.
Good riddance. Maybe they can teach you to be less of a disappointment.
The words stung, but Severus held his ground, meeting his father's gaze with defiance. Eileen appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn.
Tobias, please. It's his last night home.
Home. Ha! As if he's ever belonged here.
With a final sneer, Tobias turned and stumbled back downstairs. Eileen hesitated, torn between her son and her husband. Severus nodded slightly, giving her permission to go. As silence settled over the house once more, Severus turned to the window, his thoughts drifting to Lily and the promise of a new life at Hogwarts.
Just one more night, and everything changes.
As dawn broke over Cokeworth, two young lies stood poised on the brink of transformation. Severus Snape and Lily Evans, united by friendship and the magic thrumming in their veins, prepared to step into a world of wonder and danger. Chapter 2: The Death Eaters. The year was 1978. Hogwarts had faded into memory, its halls and classrooms replaced by the dingy confines of Spinner's End. Severus Snape, no longer the awkward schoolboy but a young man with shadows in his eyes, stood before a battered cauldron. The acrid fumes of a simmering potion wreathed his lank hair, lending an otherworldly cast to his sallow features.
Quartum suspendis, let death be suspended.
The words fell from his lips like droplets of venom. The potion hissed and roiled, its surface shimmering with an iridescent sheen that spoke of power and peril in equal measure. Severus' eyes gleamed with a feverish light, his fingers tracing intricate patterns in the air above the cauldron. A short rap at the door shattered his concentration. Severus' head snapped up, his body tensing like a coiled spring. With a flick of his wand, he concealed his work, the air shimmering briefly as wards snapped into place.
Severus, my friend, I trust I'm not interrupting anything significant?
Lucius Malfoy glided into the room, his silver blonde hair a stark contrast to the dingy surround. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the space, lingering on the hidden cauldron.
Lucius, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?
Severus' voice dripped with barely concealed disdain, but Lucius merely smirked, unfazed by the hostility.
Come now, Severus. Is that any way to greet an old friend? Especially one bearing such intriguing propositions?
Lucius produced a small, ornate box from within his robes. He placed it on the rickety table, opening it with a flourish. Inside lay a silver mask, its surface etched with intricate designs that seemed to writhe in the dim light.
Black Lord has heard whispers of your talents. He's most interested in what you might offer our cause.
Severus' breath caught in his throat. His fingers twitched, longing to reach for the mask. Recognition, power, belonging, everything he'd craved since childhood lay within his grasp.
And what, precisely, does the Dark Lord expect in return?
Merely your loyalty, Severus. Your brilliance. Your unique perspective on certain matters.
The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Severus' mind raced, weighing the possibilities against the risks. A flush of red hair and green eyes flickered through his thoughts, but he pushed it aside with practiced ease.
I see, and if I were to accept this generous offer?
Lucius' smile widened, predatory and triumphant.
Then, my dear Severus, a whole new world awaits you.
Severus' fingers closed around the silver mask, its cold surface seeming to pulse with dark promise. As he lifted it, the weight of his decision settled upon him like a shroud.
When do we begin? I'm ready to embrace this new path.
Oh, Severus, we've already begun.
The world dissolved into a whirl of black smoke. When it cleared, Severus found himself in a grand, shadowy chamber. Hooded figures formed a circle around him, their masked faces turned towards a tall, pale figure at the center.
Welcome, Severus Snape. I've been expecting you.
The Dark Lord's voice sent chills down Severus' spine, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through his veins.
My lord, I am honored to serve you and your noble cause.
Severus bowed low, his long hair falling forward to obscure his face. When he straightened, Voldemort stood before him, red eyes gleaming with interest.
Show me, young Severus. Show me what you can do.
Without hesitation, Severus drew his wand. The air crackled with magic as he demonstrated spell after spell of his own creation. The Death Eaters murmured in appreciation, but Voldemort remained silent, watching. As the last echoes of magic faded, Voldemort's lipless mouth curved into a smile.
Impressive. Most impressive. You will be a valuable addition to our ranks, Severus Snape.
The initiation ritual that followed was a blur of pain and dark magic. Severus emerged, the dark mark burning on his forearm, a symbol of his new allegiance. Months blurred into years. Severus threw himself into his work, creating ever more powerful spells and potions. His reputation grew, whispers of the half-blood prince spreading through Death Eater ranks.
Oh, Ooh, Sevy's been busy again. What nasty little surprise have you cooked up this time?
Electrix Lestrange's shrill voice cut through Severus' concentration. He looked up from his cauldron, irritation flashing in his dark eyes.
Nothing that concerns you, Bellatrix, unless you'd like to volunteer as a test subject.
You wouldn't dare, Snape. The Dark Lord.
The Dark Lord values my contributions. Can you say the same?
Bellatrix's face contorted with rage, but before she could retort, a cold voice interrupted.
Now, my faithful servants, let us not quarrel amongst ourselves.
Both Severus and Bellatrix dropped to their knees as Voldemort glided into the room.
Verus, I have a task for you. There's a group of blood traitors causing trouble in Devon.
Deal with them.
As you command, my lord. I will not fail you.
That night, Severus led a raid on a wizarding family suspected of harboring Muggleborns. As spells flew and screams rent the air, he caught sight of a young woman with red hair. For a moment, his heart stopped.
Lily, could it be you?
But it wasn't her. The woman fell, struck by a curse from Bellatrix's wand. Severus stood frozen, the scene before him blurring with memories of a laughing girl by a sun-dappled river.
Snape, what are you waiting for? Finish them!
Severus raised his wand, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly.
Sectum Sempra. May my creation serve its dark purpose.
The spell sliced through the air, leaving deep gashes on its victim. Severus watched in horror as his creation, meant for defense, became an instrument of torture in the hands of his fellow Death Eaters. Later, alone in his quarters at Spinner's End, Severus stared at his reflection in a cracked mirror. The face that looked back at him was a stranger's, pale, gaunt, with eyes that had seen too much.
What have I become? A monster in the guise of a man.
But there was no turning back. He was in too deep, the dark mark on his arm a constant reminder of his choices. Weeks later, seeking solace in fire whiskey, Severus found himself in the dingy confines of the Hod's Head. As he nursed his drink, a familiar voice drifted from a nearby booth.
The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches.
Severus' head snapped up, his alcohol-addled mind suddenly sharp. He leaned closer, straining to hear every word of the prophecy. As realization dawned, a cold dread settled in his stomach. He stumbled out of the pub, his mind reeling. The Dark Lord would stop at nothing to eliminate this threat. And if the child was born to those who had thrice defied him, Lily, it had to be Lily's child. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls of his new life came crashing down. The power, the recognition, the sense of belonging, none of it mattered if Lily was in danger. With a crack that split the night air, Severus disapparated, reappearing on a windswept hilltop. His voice, when he spoke, was raw with desperation.
I need to speak with Albus Dumbledore. Immediately. It's a matter of life and death.
As the familiar figure of Dumbledore appeared, silhouetted against the starry sky, Severus fell to his knees. Everything he had become, everything he had done, crystallized into this one moment of terrible clarity.
Please, help her. Help them. I'll do anything. Name your price.
Anything, Severus. Are you prepared for the consequences?
Dumbledore's blue eyes pierced through Severus, seeming to read the depths of his soul.
You've chosen a perilous path, my boy. One that has led you to the darkest of places. Yet here you are, seeking redemption for the sake of love.
I don't care about redemption. Just save her. Save Lily. She's all that matters.
And what of her husband, her child? Are they not worthy of salvation?
Severus flinched, his face contorting with pain and jealousy.
Them too. Just please. I beg you, protect them all.
Very well, Severus, but understand this. The road ahead will be long and fraught with danger. You must be prepared to risk everything, to walk a knife's edge between light and dark. Can you do this?
Yes, whatever it takes. I'll pay any price to keep her safe.
Then rise, Severus Snape. Your journey as a double agent begins now. May your love give you the strength to endure what lies ahead.
Chapter 3. The Spy's Crucible. A few years later, it was the autumn of 1981, mere weeks after the fall of the Dark Lord Voldemort and the end of the First Wizarding War. For 11 long years, the magical world had been torn asunder by conflict, with Voldemort and his Death Eaters waging a campaign of terror against those they deemed unworthy of magic.
So, this is to be my penance.
His words were barely a whisper, carried away by the chill Scottish wind. Snape's sallow face bore the marks of a man who had seen too much, done too much. The war had left no one untouched, least of all this complicated figure who had walked the razor's edge between light and darkness.
Welcome, Severus. I trust you found your journey uneventful.
Albus Dumbledore stood at the top of the castle steps, his long silver beard catching the weak autumn sunlight. His blue eyes, usually twinkling with mirth, held a somber gravity as he regarded his newest staff member.
As uneventful as one might expect, given the circumstances.
Snape's voice dripped with barely concealed bitterness. The circumstances he referred to were, of course, the aftermath of Voldemort's downfall. The wizarding world was still reeling, caught between jubilation at the Dark Lord's defeat and paranoia that his followers might still be at large. For Severus Snape, former Death Eater turned spy for the Order of the Phoenix, the situation was even more precarious.
Come, let us speak in my office. There is much to discuss about your new role here at Hogwarts.
As they walked through the castle's winding corridors, Snape's dark eyes darted from shadow to shadow, old habits of vigilance dying hard. The portraits whispered as they passed, no doubt spreading gossip about the school's newest and most controversial teacher.
I fail to see why my presence is necessary here, Albus. Surely there are more suitable candidates for potions, Master.
On the contrary, Severus, your skills are unparalleled, and more importantly, you have a unique perspective that will be invaluable in the years to come.
Snape's lips curled into a sneer, but he remained silent. He knew all too well what Dumbledore meant by unique perspective. As a former Death Eater, he had intimate knowledge of Voldemort's inner circle, knowledge that could prove crucial if, when, the Dark Lord returned. The First Wizarding War had left indelible scars on both the magical world and Snape's soul, etched as deeply as the lines that now creased his sallow face. With a swish of his billowing black robes, he strode through the massive oak doors, his footsteps echoing in the empty entrance hall.
Ah, Severus, welcome to your new home.
The headmaster's blue eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles, but Snape detected a hint of wariness beneath the genial facade.
This is no home, Albus. Merely a convenient arrangement.
His voice dripped with disdain, masking the conflicting emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. The potions classroom beckoned, a century of bubbling cauldrons and arcane ingredients. Snape's long fingers trailed over the worn workbenches, his mind already formulating plans to revolutionize the curriculum.
These dunderheads have no appreciation for the subtle science and exact art of potion making. I'll soon remedy that.
Months passed, and Snape's reputation as a demanding taskmaster spread through the castle like wildfire. Students quaked at the mere sight of his billowing robes, their fumbling attempts at brewing met with scathing criticism and withering glares.
Professor Snape, I don't understand. The book says to stir clockwise, but...
Wildlands? Your inability to follow simple instructions is surpassed only by your astounding lack of common sense. 5 points from Hufflepuff for wasting my time.
The student's eyes welled with tears, but Snape had already swept away, his attention focused on a simmering cauldron in the corner. Here, away from prying eyes, he conducted his true work, pushing the boundaries of potion, making far beyond the rudimentary lessons he was forced to teach. Summer arrived, bringing with it a brief respite from the tedium of teaching. Snape apparated to Spinner's End, his childhood home, now unrecognizable. Gone were the peeling wallpaper and musty odors of neglect. In their place stood a veritable fortress of magical defenses, each room a testament to Snape's paranoia and skill.
Finite incantatum.
The wards shimmered and fell, allowing him entry. Snape's quill scratched furiously across parchment, recording his latest breakthrough in experimental brewing techniques. These treatises, published anonymously, were causing quite a stir in the potions community. A tapping at the window interrupted his concentration. An elegant eagle owl perched on the sill, a scroll tied to its lid. Snape's lips thinned as he recognized the Malfoy family's seal.
Severus, old friend, it's been far too long. Join me for dinner at the manor this evening. There are matters we must discuss.
Snape's dark eyes narrowed as he read the missive. He knew all too well what matters Lucius wished to address. With a flick of his wand, he summoned his traveling cloak. The opulent dining room of Malfoy Manor stood in stark contrast to the austere surroundings of Spinner's Inn. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished mahogany table, where Lucius Malfoy sat, resplendent in robes of deepest green.
Severus, how kind of you to join us. I trust you're finding your new position satisfying?
The words dripped with barely concealed disdain. Snape's face remained impassive, years of practice allowing him to don the mask of the perfect double agent.
It serves its purpose, Lucius. One must make certain sacrifices in these trying times.
Indeed. And speaking of trying times, have you heard the whispers? They say he is not truly gone.
Snape's hand tightened imperceptibly around his goblet, his mind racing to formulate the perfect response.
Whispers are the currency of fools, Lucius. I deal in certainties.
The conversation continued, a delicate dance of half-truths and veiled threats. With each carefully chosen word, Snape added another strand to the web of deception he was weaving. As he took his leave, the weight of his burden seemed to press down upon him with renewed force. Back at Hogwarts, Snape threw himself into his preparations with renewed vigor. He spent countless hours in the depths of the dungeons, perfecting his occlumency skills and devising new spells that might prove useful in the coming conflict. One autumn evening, as the first hints of winter's chill crept through the castle, Snape found himself standing before the enchanted mirror in his quarters. The face that stared back at him was barely recognizable, gaunt, lined, and haunted by the weight of his secrets.
For you, Millie, always.
The words were barely a whisper, but they echoed in the silent room like a solemn vow. As if summoned by his thoughts, a commotion in the hallway drew his attention. Snape swept from his chambers, his wand at the ready.
Severus, thank goodness it's Potter, Harry Potter. He's here at Hogwarts.
Snape felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. The moment he had both dreaded and longed for had finally arrived. With a curt nod to his colleague, he strode towards the Great Hall, his mind awhirl with conflicting emotions. As he pushed open the heavy doors, his eyes immediately sought out the small, dark-haired boy seated at the Gryffindor table. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. In Harry's face, Snape saw echoes of James Potter, the man he had hated with every fiber of his being. But those eyes, Lily's eyes, stared back at him, filled with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. In that instant, Severus Snape knew that the true test of his loyalty was only just beginning.